George of the jungle.
Hey George, this example that you're going to show me just tells me that you've got to have some pretty stupid buyers in your market right now. Well, maybe not. This is George Anderson. Thanks for coming into thecreditjungle.com today. And this is going to be part one of seller finance magic and how to look for opportunities that become a win-win for both a buyer and a seller. So before I get to all the math on the board here behind me, I want to pull up this chart here that just shows four townhomes that are all in the same project, and this was out in Tooele County. And if you look on there, you're going to see that the bottom unit on there was actually put on the market before all the other ones. It sat on the market longer, but it also sold before the other ones did as well. And not only that, it sold, the first one listed there is an identical unit, both row end units, everything else is identical on them. And yet the one that sold for $45,000 more. So do we have a dumb buyer here, or what's going on? Well, let's dive into the numbers a little bit and then you judge whether or not that this transaction makes sense. So what happened here is that the seller on this particular home had bought it fairly recently, didn't put much money down. It wasn't exactly a short sale transaction, but they just had to ask enough money so they could make sure that the mortgage could get paid in full. We're going to cover some short sales and get into some different scenarios in a couple of other videos. But on this one, the numbers worked so that the buyer was able to make it work with the seller so that the seller could at least walk away and not have to come to the closing with any money. Okay, and the bank was, everything was brought current on the loan, no problems with that. But the buyer that came in here brought in $35,000 as a down payment, had a contract balance on here, and whether this is a contract for deed or an all-inclusive trust deed, we'll get into those details later. In this case, it was a contract for deed. But the seller was able to give the buyer an interest rate of 4 3/4, which is better than what we've got right now. Well, that's a principal and interest payment here of $1,904. Now on these comparisons here, I'm only going to compare principal and interest to principal and interest and then mortgage insurance, or if there is some. The HOA fee is the exact same for each unit. The taxes are the same. The insurance is going to be the same. So we're just going to look at the variable. We're going to look at the down payment and then what the payment was on it. So if somebody wanted to buy, they said, well, why would I go pay $400,000 for this unit when on the other end of the row here, I've got the exact same unit that's for sale for $355. Why would somebody overpay and pay $400? Well, if you're not doing seller financing, then you're going to be coming up on a conventional loan with just say a 5% down payment, $337,250 for a loan. On the best day, you're going to get maybe a 5 3/4 rate, but if you've got some issues with credit scores or any other number of things going on here, but this is at 5% down, this is a great rate. That's a $1,968 principal and interest payment plus another $150 for mortgage insurance. So even though you bought your same unit here for $45,000 less, your payment is over $200 per month more. What do you think the buyer really cares about? Do you think the buyer over here cares that he overpaid, but he's got a payment that's $200 a month less? Probably not. Well, what if the buyer was going to be an investor? Well, now you're going to need 20% down. That's going to be a balance of $284, and investor rate on that with 20% down on a good day is going to be at 7.5%. Well, that payment, $1,985 a month. It's still $80 a month more than what the buyer got who quote unquote overpaid for the home. Well, guess what? The person that bought this home over here and paid the $400,000 for it actually was an investor. So sit and think about that as an investor. Over here, you'd have to have $71,000 into the house, and that doesn't even count closing costs of $7,000. So now you've got 78 grand tied up into this property, and yet, regardless of whatever these units are going to rent for, they're going to be almost identical in rent. This guy's always going to have $81 a month less cash flow than the investor over here. Well, what were the closing costs on this transaction? About $600. So the out-of-pocket for the investor who bought this property with seller financing was half of what it would have been here, and he's got a better cash flow situation. So now go ahead and take a look at those comparable sales again, and you tell me if anybody got a raw deal on this. The seller got all the money they needed to be able to have their mortgage taken over, okay, and have the new buyer making the payments on it. They didn't have to come to closing with any money, but on top of that, the seller's interest rate on here is less than 4.75%. So they were able to get their home sold, got their asking price for it, but they're also getting monthly cash flow out of this. These sellers are not going to get that cash flow out of it. It's a one and done deal. So this is a great example here of how seller financing can really play into a situation on a home that everybody else would look at and say, gosh, this guy's house is overpriced. I'm not going to pay that. Well, when you take it in the context of looking at where interest rates are, the market is right now, this was a very smart move for this buyer. So thanks for coming into thecreditjungle.com today. This is George Anderson, and these are the types of tools that are available if you're working with the right agents and the right lender that understand how these things work. So don't dismiss these properties that might have been on the market for a little while longer. Maybe they've had some price drops and they're not selling as quick. Maybe there's another option you can offer the seller. So think about that. And thanks for coming into thecreditjungle.com. This is George Anderson. Have a great day.